public collaborative call. This is Sarah DeSilvi. I am the Director of Terminology for the Gravity Project, and we're going to be covering some terminology elements for social isolation, IPV, and elder abuse. IPV meaning intimate partner violence, and elder abuse today. We're also going to be doing some technology and policy updates, some exciting things coming there. And I just to give a public statement. I just drove like good 26 hours straight to bring my son back from college. So if I lag a bit, I'm so sorry. I just arrived about 2 hours ago, so I'll do my best to be my normal self. Maybe I won't be running the chat quite as briskly as I usually do. Next slide, please. Thank you for joining us. Again, as always, due to the large number of attendees, everyone is muted upon entry. We ask that you remain muted to avoid background noise. The call is always recorded. Everything we've ever done is available and publicly free on the Confluence. So if you have any questions about things that have been covered, you can find everything there going back to our inception. We do encourage everybody to actively participate. I do my best to integrate every thought that you all may have that you place in the chat. And again, it wasn't 26 hours straight. We stopped briefly for sleep. So just safety first. I'm a nurse. Thanks, Gabe. So if you put something in the chat, I will integrate into the conversation, and we will make sure it gets heard by everybody. Next slide, please. This is just the common antitrust practices slide. Next slide, please. Formally and like wholeheartedly, we ask everyone to officially join the project. So we are many member collective. We're going many years strong now. So if you officially join the project, you become part of our communications. You're able, if you're a formal member, you're able to participate in the consensus voting, which is coming up in 2 weeks. And this is you formally join. Again, those committed members, those ones who come to the meetings, review the content, all of you all are very, very critical for establishing the consensus of our end product. So please do join. There is a way on the Confluence to check whether anyone else has joined in the past from your organization. That's there as well. And then the Confluence is just an incredible amount of information. We really have improved the Confluence insofar as it's very up to date. It has definitions of the domains we're working on. We've already have there for your review the master files for social isolation and intimate partner violence. You can get information on the subject matter experts. There's just a host of information there. And it's also where you can review the homework you might have for each domain, and of course the technical division as well. Next slide, please. Again, a shout out as always to our project founders, our grantors, and the extensive investment of our in-kind supporters across the ecosystem who really help do the things that we have to do. Next slide, please. We are, a funded organization, so we do seek additional sponsors for our 2021 operations. If you're interested in learning more about sponsoring, you can always send an email to the source of all emails, so gravityproject@emiadvisors.net. It really is the best place to communicate to directly because our team is really remarkable at making sure every email that's sent to that email gets addressed and tracked within our project plan. So if you have any questions regarding sponsoring or anything else regarding Gravity, gravityproject@emiadvisors.net. You can also visit the Gravity Project sponsor page on the Confluence. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of Sarah, but there's hidden representation from our amazing subject matter experts. So brief announcements, project schedule and overview, and then we're going to be discussing, I think we're actually going to be discussing intimate partner violence and social isolation. We might flip these because we do have representation from our social isolation SMEs first. We have Matt Pentel here until 4:30, and then we do have representation from our intimate partner violence team ongoing, Lisa James and Chris Grosso. So we might try to do social isolation first. Again, both of these are heading into vote. at our next meeting. The masters are on the Confluence and we're posted there. So we hope you're all ready to go into that vote well informed, and they're here to answer questions for you. Just a brief highlight on elder abuse. Again, our goal today is to make sure any questions regarding IPV and social isolation, again, intimate partner violence and social isolation, are addressed. And then we'll dive deep into elder abuse for the remaining of June. Mark has exciting policy updates. Bob has a tech update, and then community homework and next steps really are to review the masters on the Confluence and get ready for the vote in 2 weeks. Next slide, please. Next slide. We are trying to consolidate our announcements, so we do have an announcements page. We always try to highlight the sister meeting, which is where we focus on the SDOH IG on Wednesdays from 3 to 4. We do want to bring to light our partners in the ecosystem, so we do have that HIMSS SDOH guide. We have the ONC workshop coming up on June 18th. And then we have a couple different disclosures. Evelyn, do you have anything to speak to here, or do you want? Anything to mention or highlight on this page?
Sure, so I was just going to message. The big announcement that we are going to HIMSS. So on our events page, and I'll ask Sarah Bahal if she can add the link here. We have 2 presentations, so we'll also love to hear if any Gravity members will be attending HIMSS in person. One education session from Sarah and Linda, one education session from Bob and Corey. In regards to the other announcements here, ONC has an upcoming webinar where our very own Sarah DeSilva will be presenting next week. And then there's an OMB RFI. We are not responding on behalf of the Gravity Project, but encourage our members to do so and take a look at it. The grant, CDC grant, I can't remember which is this one, but there is an upcoming grant. I think this one's July 6th. And then stay tuned for the new coalition that we'll give an announcement for. That's it. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Evelyn, our fearless leader. All right.
Sarah.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi. I'm not sure whether this is in scope or not, but Mick Tripathi and ONC have put out a request for all of us to comment to them about how we like to envision HIT in the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. They obviously want to go beyond whatever current policy and current obligations and legal requirements are to some vision of this field that they can start, what's the right metaphor, planting the ground for, preparing the ground for. So I don't know whether, Evelyn, whether that belongs on this list or not, but I thought I would bring it up.
Yes, we are aware, and Mark has been tracking it. Mark, don't mean to put you on the spot.
Thanks, Lucy. Yes, we are tracking it and coming up with a plan. Those are due July 30th, which doesn't mean we're waiting until all that long, but we're taking a look now at what might be the best approach. I will say, for me personally, I was disappointed that they sunsetted the interoperability roadmap 2.5 years early, which would have, they would have had us looking at what was accomplished by 2024, and now they're moving it out to 2030. So I think we can look at this as the cup being half full or the cup being half empty, and we're trying to figure out what the best approach is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other thoughts or questions on this slide? I love that Mark on the spot is so good at being on the spot. Thanks, Mark. You're great. Next slide, please. All right, next slide. No surprises here. We do highlight the CMS Connectathon coming up. Bob will possibly, I think, he's going to talk to that in the later part of the presentation. But you can see we're wrapping up the screening and diagnoses elements for elder abuse, intimate partner violence, social isolation, and loneliness. I do want to bring to light that our amazing community liaison and public health expert, Asha Emanuel, who's part of the terminology team, is going to be helping to spearhead that interventions work group we've been talking about for some time. And this is really to try to do as much labor on the interventions terminology that we plan to address in August and September as possible. So again, social workers, care coordinators, care managers, community health navigators, community health workers, all the folks who are actively directing folks to programs, and then of course the community-based organizations. So the dream is to get that little council up and running, and then it's kind of an ad hoc group that we will hopefully reinvigorate as needed as we work through the project over time, because our project roadmap is now carrying us for a couple of years. So we definitely hope to develop a team that can help us on that work going forward. And I love the little clap from Ellen. Oh, I saw that. Thank you. Any other questions on the roadmap? All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is just, again, I think we've got this down now, but just to highlight the way that it works. So it's like we have this balance between the subject matter experts who really keep the clinical eye, especially across our domains right now. We have a really great balance between clinicians, clinical researchers, and like non-clinical researchers in our subject matter expert panels. So to balance that with the community needs and make sure that everything is kind of fit for purpose. Whenever anybody has a challenge to anything that's in the presentation, we really need to understand the rationale, and if you could submit that formally, that would be great. So even though we have this amazing conversation, it's really important for tracking. If anything you see in this end-to-end review is challenging, or you feel like you want to offer some kind of counterpoint, by all means, bring it to light here, but we really want to make sure it's logged. We track everything in the Gravity Project. There's a change report for every single thing that we do, just for good methods. So if you have ideas or further thoughts about how to augment or change things, just submit them via email. Lolita, please add gentrification to the parking lot. More and more this is associated with housing insecurity. Yes, I really do feel like we need to highlight this in our community and neighborhood level domains. So Lolita, as always, thank you so much for your voice, and 100%, you're always spot on. All right, next slide, please. Again, this is just if any questions are raised regarding past domains, we just ask the whole, and then we're happy to orient you to the work we've done in past domains. We have these 3 domains we're really trying to wrap up before the end of June, middle of July. Next slide, please. Any questions? Okay, next slide. And next slide. All right, so this is the broken down roadmap of just the terminology work. No surprises here, it was just what we saw. Next slide. Our task today. So today is the 10th of June. The job is to go over thoroughly and carefully what we've presented to you on social isolation and intimate partner violence. Again, the vote, as you can see, happens the next time we meet together. And then we'll be going very in depth on elder abuse screening and diagnoses when we see each other next meeting, because we will have been wrapping up the social isolation IPV elements. That's pretty much it. There's not much on elder abuse today. We're really trying to focus on social isolation and intimate partner violence. And again, these masters have been on the Confluence for a little bit, so we hope you are familiar with them. Next slide, please. Any questions? All right, next slide, please. Here we are again. This is our little, what are we doing now? We're reviewing again before the vote. Next slide, please. On to our social isolation and loneliness screening and diagnoses end-to-end review. I really should augment this because social isolation was our original domain. It bloomed into social isolation, loneliness, support, and even quality. So you'll see that as we go forward. So as we enter domains, often in our naivete, we choose one little element, and then the subject matter experts come with the breadth of their expertise and expand it to make sure it's really aligned with what we know in the literature and we know in best practice with screening and clinical assessment. Next slide, please. These are amazing social isolation subject matter experts. It's just been an honor to work with them. We all really learn something every time they come to a subject matter expert huddle, and then of course they've been presenting on the course over the course of the project here. The master list is available for review. It's been there for a little bit. No great changes today, but we're going to highlight just a few different things. I believe Dr. Matt Pentel's on the call, and really just because we want to make sure that if you have questions about how this plays out, he's here to help answer. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm trying to do something new that when there's new information, really clearly highlighting that they're with like big red, bold updates, right? So the work of the subject matter experts and the terminology team is ongoing. This has been the case with each of our domains, right? So we have some updates on the definitions of these terms, which is really important. And then if anybody has questions about how that plays out, I believe Matt's here to assist. So again, we started with our work placing on the roadmap just social isolation, but the truth is when it comes to the realm of social connection, there really are multiple concepts which are distinct and interdependent and independent of each other. Oh, hi, Matt. Thank you. So these are the definitions, and I just really want to highlight. So this last definition of relationship quality is in process, but we do have definitions on social isolation, loneliness, and social support. And the reason why I wanted Matt to be present, and thank you, Matt, is he's a clinician, right? And we got a really interesting question from one of our community members on the fact whether social isolation brought risk if it was chosen, right? So if you're an introvert and you choose not to have any social contact, how does that play out in real time, right? And so Matt actually presented this really lovely example of how you can interplay social isolation and loneliness to get to a more robust picture of a person's health. So if anybody has questions, he's here to answer them, right? So like you could have somebody who doesn't have very many social contacts, but they're not lonely. And so these things can interplay with each other, right? Or you can have somebody who doesn't have very many social contacts and is socially isolated, but they are lonely, and that tells a different story. And then each of our screeners, again, you can see how these concepts are sorted. So you would be able to come up with these diagnoses in real time. Any questions, since Matt, in all of his expertise, is here to assist? Are you all? I love it, Matt. I'm just going to highlight.
Sarah,
Yeah, hi.
hi, it's Monique. So are these going to be almost like subdomains, a little bit like, material hardship and financial insecurity are sort of separate, or are these going to be one thing, parts of one domain?
I appreciate that you're asking that from the technical perspective, right? That was trippy. So I'm going to let Matt answer that, but they really do fall under the broad realm of social connection. I'm going to let Matt get to that, but they are distinct and subdomains within that type as far as we're seeing them. I just want to highlight one more use case before we go on, because you can imagine, for instance, especially with older populations, being socially isolated and having sufficient social support is one thing, but being socially isolated and not having social support would be another. So Matt, how do the interventions for selections of the intervention social isolation versus loneliness differ? Matt, do you want to address that question or any thoughts? He's here. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. I think that's actually a great question that'll help illustrate some of the differences between them. And I think why having these as distinct concepts really helps at the intervention level. So I think for using the example of, let's take a person who lives alone and lives in a more isolated area, there's no transportation lines and, is unable, doesn't drive. But they're totally content with that. They like living wherever they're living. They don't need, to be happy having relationships with people. So they're socially isolated. They're not talking to people a lot. They're not living with anybody, but they're not lonely. So for them, an intervention might be, you screen positive for isolation, but not loneliness. So I'm not going to refer them to some sort of support group or some sort of cognitive skills in terms of establishing and maintaining relationships, but I might refer them to some transportation resources since they can't get them, or see if there are other services that I could get them out there because they are socially isolated and trying to figure out how that's related to their particular health situation. Whereas a loneliness intervention might be they're living in, again, these are just examples, living in the middle of the city. They actually have a lot of people that support them, but they still feel lonely for whatever reason. And that intervention might actually be something that's sort of getting to the crux of their loneliness. Some of these, again, like CBT interventions, or establishing other relationships, reconnecting with other groups that will make them feel less lonely, even though they might be surrounded by family, but maybe they're missing connections of their own peers or that type of thing. So it's just some examples of how you might tailor things differently. And let's see, I'm seeing, I hope that answers it. Please put it.
It did. Jenny gave you affirmative. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh,
well
great.
done.
And I'm reading down to Mike's, intrigued by relationship quality, wonder whether this would be a global measure or whether it would be more granular quality of FA relationship, friend relationships, or for each member of a circle. Let's see, either of operationally definitions could be difficult. Yeah, agree, because it's a really good point, because you probably have different relationship qualities with different people in your life. And so I see that one as, it's probably, and I don't know, I'm off the cuff here, so Sarah might be like, no, Matt, that's good. But you could get as granular, as broad, or as categorical as possible. So you could, if you're, let's say you're identifying someone who is, has relationships, and maybe you're identifying, you could talk about that in terms of, with your family, would you generally say they're, positive? Or you could say something like, with your partner in particular, with this child, with that child. So you could get, or you could just say in general, do you feel like your relationships are? So I think, right, as someone who loves like data minutia, I mean, I love the more granular the better, but I do think in terms of how practical it gets, it would have to be a little bit broad. That's a gut instinct, and I'm not, I don't think we have the evidence quite yet of like what level is the most correlated with health outcomes. Although I know,
Matt, this is Mike. I just unmuted. It's a hard concept for a lot of reasons, and for me, just trying to use it clinically would be so interwoven with somebody's general outlook. So somebody in the middle of a depressive episode is going to interpret a lot of the relationships as negative, when in fact they may be incredibly supportive much of the time. And it'd be great to do some more work on this to figure out how to use it. But boy, there's
totally.
so many things that it intersects with that we also measure and might not know.
Totally. And I think, yeah, Mike, and I'm thinking of it in terms of clinically too. The way I was always thinking of all of these was, where is that exception where you check yes to all of these and it seems like everything is positive? Like you're not lonely, you're surrounded by people, you're not isolated, you're with a lot of people and a lot of connections, but like, gosh, the people you're around, maybe, it's not that positive, that it's sort of stressful, so trying to get, like, if you said yes to all these and you seem like someone who doesn't need an intervention, what's that thing that's going to pick up maybe something that's a risk factor? And I do agree it's complex, and we could really try to look into how it could be useful more.
Matt, are there any indirect questions that could get you to this concept? Just a question that asks about a specific thing or two in somebody's life that would let you then somehow conclude that the relationship quality was bad, instead of directly asking somebody what the quality of the relationships is.
It's a really good question. I actually think, to be honest, some of the components of some of the loneliness scales, like for example, the UCLA, get at that. However, I do think keeping that separate as a construct is better for when we're trying to keep them social isolation, loneliness, and quality. In terms of something that's sort of a proxy or something more sensitive or something you could use, to be honest, I have not done as much work on the quality in the quality world, so I probably couldn't speak to that well. But I can look in and send out to our listserv after this and see if anybody could speak to that. So it's a great question.
So did you just say whether positive responses to questions about social isolation and loneliness get into the additional security and privacy protections for mental health stuff? Or is this, are you anticipating that screening for this and the answers to this and the interventions for this are going to be in the general medical record, or would they go into the mental health portion of a record which has additional protections?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, personally, well, yeah, this is just I don't speak for everybody as the experts, but in my mind, the isolation and loneliness, the way I think of it, is that they are risk factors for having mental health, having mental health, adverse mental health symptoms or having mental health diagnoses, but not necessarily equated with them. I do think a lot of times loneliness and social isolation and sort of mental health are lumped more together, even though actually, again, like they're sort of all distinct concepts. So I think honestly, if there was education around this, although we know that doesn't do everything, but they are distinct concepts such that I think putting in the general medical record is actually appropriate. And that if, things were positive, you might delve into more mental health private questions that would be in the other part of the record. But that's sort of my first pass take.
So this is Sarah. So there's two things I want to actually three things I want to add. So number one, I think it's important to note that the reason why this is in italics is like in process is part of what Gravity has to do is hold space for things that are critical in the literature, just to make sure from a taxonomy standpoint and terminology standpoint, we consider it as we go forward. But we don't know if we're going to fully flesh this out within this period of time. We're going to do our best, right? We only undertook to do social isolation, but we have to build as this is coming, the same way we had to build with cultural acceptability as being a facet of food insecurity, and all those elements of transportation insecurity being critical. But we don't necessarily have screening questions and answers for all of them. So it's like we have to, like, if you build it, they will come this in some way, just from a logic perspective. And then I do want to highlight that Julianne is on the call, and she's like, I'm here if you need me. And the last thing I want to say though is that, like, just to answer Lucy's question, I mean, like, I am a substance use disorder treating family practice provider, psych specialist in rural family medicine. There is no special place in my record where things go, where it's, where it reaches that mental behavioral health privacy, like is it 542 CFR or whatever it is, right? So it's all in my world, Lucy, it's all here, right? So that there's a different level of practice and privacy within my designated agency, but I'm doing the same thing, right? So it's a little tricky, just from a privacy perspective and in population health management and family medicine, right?
I appreciate that we're at the beginning of the conversation here. That was very helpful because from my point of view, especially during COVID, I was getting calls from people who assumed that because of COVID, I was socially isolated and or lonely and or desperate to hear a human voice. And I personally was none of the above, but I was really struck that somebody thought that enough people would be feeling that way that they set up this entire new structure that I knew nothing about. So, I'm experiencing this conversation based on that and realizing that conversation about these features of life or characteristics, I'm not sure what the right word is, are coming up now, perhaps because of COVID, and people were so worried about it. And obviously we have a lot of evidence now for the younger members of the population on this subject, and the members of the population confined in nursing homes who couldn't be visited. So, okay.
Thank you, Lucy. So I know Matt has a hard stop at 4:30, so I just want to, well, EST time. I just want to respect that. Julianne, I just want to make sure that we're wrapping up this well, respecting his time. Dr. Holt-Lunstad, would you like to speak a little bit? Anything else you want to pipe in on?
I mean, one thing I can add to what Matt was saying earlier, in addressing the question about how granular to go with this, and where this might be clinically relevant in terms of relationship quality, is perhaps at the network level, but also at the caregiver level. Such that there's evidence in the literature that suggests that that even those who have support, if that caregiver is overbearing, overly controlling in that support, with their medical regimen, that leads to actually poorer outcomes. And so from a clinical standpoint, it may be relevant to not only understand what supports are available, but what is the quality of the relationship with those that they get that support from.
Hi, this is Courtney Baldridge from N4A. And Julianne, I'm really glad you raised that. Having folks that sit on the ground and deal with these things every day and trying to understand why clients aren't engaging and looking at those barriers. Absolutely, the relationship quality can be an important factor in that. And especially if you're dealing with isolated and or lonely clients, sometimes it's a little bit of an excavation to understand what their barriers are, but those are very real and often prevalent.
Thank you, Courtney. Very, very helpful. I love that you were right here to answer right when Mike was calling to light. It was perfect. So Mike is like raising this concept, yeah, about the community addressing, a community assisting and addressing and highlighting CBOs and AAAs. And Courtney's like, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. I'm from N4A.
Sarah?
Yeah?
I had, this is Charles. How are you?
I'm good, Charles.
So I have really data that supports community activities in several areas in US, especially in sorry, what's the name of the isolated area? Not urban.
Rural.
Rural area. Yes.
I'm from Vermont. I say rural. Yes.
Yeah, rural. So yes, there are data supports that rural area by itself is absolutely a variable for social isolation and social prevalence or psychological prevalence. However, the community, there are several data that shows that community activities involvement definitely reduce the risk of social isolation, loneliness, and any prevalence associated with those factors. So, so by all means, the stuff that we do not only will influence the clinical individual complaint, but definitely can shape the policy for community on a global level. Over.
Yeah, so Charles, one of the things that we're very lucky with is that the groups of subject matter experts we have, which are so exceptional, are already partnered in working with many of the agencies we also work with, such as ACL, really on identifying, kind of an intervention set for social isolation within that work as well. So we look forward to bringing in all that knowledge about how these different subdomains or subtypes correlate to these different intervention types that we'll be doing in the fall. Yeah, and so Sonali is just raising, we do across these psychosocial domains, privacy comes to play, whether it be social isolation, loneliness, and social support, or whether it be intimate partner violence, or whether it be elder abuse. Yeah, so each of these realms we're entering right now are actually, we take with utmost care, privacy and consent and sharing. And in fact, definitely Lisa James is on the call or will be for IPV, has a lot of energy in ensuring that we're true to that, those needs for privacy and consent as we go forward in our technology belt. Was that helpful? It is very different than the socioeconomic domains we've addressed in the past, and we definitely take that very seriously. And again, so everything under relationship qualities and process, we're just holding space for it because of it is a critical element that we cannot neglect to hold space for. So we'll refine it in time in italics. This is why. So Julianne, any last thoughts before we go on to the next slide? Wise, Julianne?
I think it's fine.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, and Lucy's just echoing the reason I asked about confidentiality at the start of the conversation. Talking does comply huge trade-offs for the patient. Absolutely. And again, I really want to hold that thought throughout the conversations because, of course, that holds true with each of the different domains we're talking about right now. And this is partly why I feel like the cues methods, a part of what Futures Without Violence in our IPV work is highlighting, is this kind of preliminary prep approach, which you'll see in that domain as we come forward closely, which really is about, you know, establishing information, even if safety and dissemination of education, even in the absence of disclosure, right? So making sure that even if you are not in a position to say how you, like your truth regarding honest answers to questions because of, you know, privacy concerns, at least we can try to move the ball forward. All right. Okay. So these are the definitions again that we're working on for our master list for the different screening questions and answers, and you'll see these kind of encoded. And I do want to state that there's some of these questions and answers go across. Again, Julianne's better than I. Yes, Elisa's piping in too. But any other last questions for the social isolation folks on this page? Okay. Next slide. I just want to do some data bits for you. Again, just trying to show you some of the screening elements that are there. So prepare. How often do you see or talk to people that you care about and feel close to? Loneliness, you know, and I have this little strike through because this feeling element, as Dr. Holt-Lonsdale could do better than I, is really actually a loneliness perception as opposed to social isolation. So I just struck it through and we'll work with Promise to try to fix that. And then the social support element. I have someone who will listen to me when I need to talk, right? So these are 3 different screening questions and answers we have in our set that you can see played out in how they would map to some of these concepts. Yeah, Sonali, yes, absolutely, right? So we need to consider that very carefully.
Sarah,
Yeah?
this is Courtney Baldridge. I know there was some work done. It's now been 5, 6, 7 years ago on a report on how people engage in their community. And the number one way people reported being engaged in community was running errands. And typically the banks and the pharmacies popped up to the top. So I would suggest that in that screener and those questions that you might also address that, generally running errands and engaging in the community that way, because it was interesting that that was the report. It was a self-report from consumers out, and that's how they categorized it.
So I will review the screening questions and answers we have already to see if it's included, and if not, I will reach out to you to see if there's a standardized question and answer we can include to meet that need.
Okay.
All right. Next, and I hear you. Like I live downtown and I know all of the people in every single shop by name. So that is my connection. Next slide, please. All right, so I do want to highlight again, this is on the master list, some of the sorting again of some of these concepts. Again, some of it's in flux, right? But social isolation, loneliness, and social support and how they look on the master lists and how one might operationalize them in clinical settings or community settings. And Lisa is saying, oh my, how online shopping and curbside pickup would change that level of engagement through running errands. True, true, true.
Sarah?
Yes?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Courtney just said, running errand, going to the post office. I'm also often struck by how long people take at the post office window. And
Yeah.
I often infer that this may be their only human contact today, or maybe even this week. So hearing that there's evidence that running errands is considered to be socializing is really striking. Thank you.
I know my clinic has a regular visitor who usually brings the whole clinic fresh bacon, a flat of bacon from their smoker down the street. And they mentioned the other day that they've been having to bring it to the bank during the pandemic because the bank didn't have as strict visitor policies as we did, and so it was just very sweet. I was like, so that's where the bacon's going, and they were like, yes, and I was like, okay, we'll have to bring it up with the ladies at the bank.
I think if you really want to know who's isolated in your community, go to the local pharmacy, go to the local bank, and ask them for a list of names. They'll be sitting there with them for a long time drinking their coffee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so again, so Sonali and Tom are having a really good conversation. I really, we do talk about privacy and consent a lot in those technology meetings on Wednesdays. So I do encourage folks to come to see if we can make sure that we keep that conversation going. And then we will be talking about interventions such as tech and social media and all of that as we go forward in the fall. All right. Any other questions here? Next slide. I hope we have
Sarah?
Yeah?
Yeah, I just had one question about the prior slide. It seems like there's a bit of a mixing of social isolation with needs. So living alone is maybe an indicator of social isolation, it may not, but needing a housekeeper is an entirely separate type of thing, or needing help. To me, that is, while I acknowledge that it may be a social determinant of health problem, I don't know that it should get pre-coordinated with social isolation issues.
So I may have put that in the wrong spot, but please feel free to, again, this is the end-to-end review, so submit a comment and to that effect so we can formally log it in an email, and then that makes a lot of sense to me. So we just have to review it. So again, this is a really good example of like just for tracking, concern identified with what's in the set, send an email with the comment. It's the end-to-end review period. We're not voting for a couple weeks. So we would just want to make sure that we integrate that formally. Perfect. Okay. All right, and these were existing terminology terms that were there, so hence the inclusion. All right. Are we good with social isolation? Again, Jim, so if you want to submit those comments formally, again, no, absolutely just questions and answers and send an email, and we'll be happy to review them. Or if they're already represented on the masters, wonderful. Perfect. This is just again to make it sure that it's like we get, because we track every submission and we make sure we respond to it correctly. All right. Okay. Next slide, trying to make sure we get through IPV and then give time to Mark and Bob. Next slide, please. Again, our amazing subject matter experts. I believe we have the amazing Lisa James here today, and Chris Grosso might have been able to join us. They had a meeting right up until about 4:30. Again, the master list is available for review on the Confluence. Next step is that consensus vote in 2 weeks. So we want to make sure that any questions and answers are addressed. And again, I do not want to minimize the conversations regarding privacy we were having regarding social isolation. They are critical for every single domain we're addressing right now. There's really not a single element. And so we talk about privacy in the Technical Advisory Committee. We talk about privacy in the IG, and maybe we can just highlight that we need to kind of huddle and make sure that we bring some of that information on privacy that we're talking about in the TAC and the IG meeting for the next meeting. All right. Okay, next slide, please. Again, what I want to highlight to you is, again, you heard me mention this regarding education regardless of disclosure, right? So Lisa presented on the CUES framework at the last meeting. So you see this on the screening review, which is this kind of like introductory conversation. Regardless, again, of the outcome, Lisa can testify to this, and education is given just in case. But if you do identify yes, then you would be able to cascade into those IPV screening tools. And so you can see this again on the master list Next slide, please. And again, it was part of that presentation from last week, which is available on the Confluence. Again, we do have that screener assessment that you're able to download and review on the Confluence. I just want to highlight, and this is kind of why I wrote Lisa in here today. So if there's tools that you feel like are missing, this is the rationale that we took, where the subject matter experts took when we were reviewing them. So any tool that was not specifically regarding intimate partner violence. So any secondary screeners that really assess severity or safety after the fact of identifying the presence of IPV, akin to our transportation insecurity domains and other domains. We are going to move forward with supporting build of those questions and answers into LOINC, but they wouldn't be a screener, they would kind of be a secondary screener. We also taken the effort to remove tools that limit gender options because they really are not applicable to population health, because they really specify more often than not the actual gender of the perpetrator, and that is very limited when it comes to population health methods. Any questions regarding this? Again, this is all available on the master list, and this is why I wrote Lisa here. Maybe she's not needed. Maybe you're all like, sounds good.
Sarah, this may seem superfluous, but we are only talking about people over 18 when we're talking about this violence issue, right? We're not talking about the ACE surveys or talking to children about what happens in the family, right?
We are not talking about sexual abuse of children by a relationship like of a caregiver. We actually are including intimate partner violence that occurs between partners less than 18, though, right? So if a couple was 16, right, you know, a 17-year-old person and a 16-year-old person, and they were in a relationship, that is still intimate partner violence. And you will see the codes in our diagnoses represented appropriately. And actually, we've been having a lot of conversations, and this is actually, if we go to the next slide, you can see this. Next slide, please. On where we go forward with diagnoses with that and the fact, right? So there really is everything regarding, intimate partner violence is fairly codified. And I don't mean that lightly. I mean, like literally, like these are the things you have to say. But the things we're advocating for are non-binary perpetrator codes, because you can see that they're very binary: husband, wife, male partner, female partner, which really excludes a percentage of the population. That's just not amenable, especially when you consider the amazing presentation from the Fenway team last meeting regarding rates of IPV among LGBTQ and IA individuals. So that's just not appropriate. So we're advocating for that. And then also, I think it's interesting to consider whether the term partner is really able to be extended to logically to individuals under than 18, which we're kind of figuring is probably okay. But yeah, so Lisa can speak to this better than I. Adolescent relationship abuse is highly prevalent, so it's critical to include them. But it's a good distinction between that and ACEs. Lisa, take the floor. Wise Lisa.
Oh, just wanted to just chime in and make sure that we do go below age 18. There are definitely some unique considerations, both in terms of interventions, documentation, and privacy, but we see very high rates of adolescent relationship abuse, so it's important. But I think it was Lucy who brought it up, and I think it is different, again, a different approach from ACEs, so I'm glad you raised it.
Wouldn't it be? And I only chose 18 to indicate to everyone who's here that I was talking about, quote, adults, unquote. And so, because, you know, we have the pediatrics, internal family practice dichotomy in medical specialization. So I just wanted us to be clear about which patients are intended to be talked to about this. Okay.
Sorry, this is Dr. Miller. Wouldn't it also be important to document if the partner, either male or female, is an adult, whereas the abused partner is a child? Because that would have very different implications in terms of needed follow-up.
Terrific, Holly. Thank you.
Yeah, Holly, that actually reminds me of the approach that we're taking within elder abuse, which is kind of a clustering of information to trigger mandatory reporting in the presence of different state policies regarding APS, Adult Protective Services reporting. Lisa can talk to that, but just Holly, that's very similar to what we're doing in the elder abuse space. Lisa, any thoughts there?
Just you're lifting up the right questions, and that it would differ based on who, the age of the person who's using violence, the type of violence, and the state and county in which it takes place. So we'll absolutely have to tease that out in terms of intervention.
And Sarah, as a follow-up on this, even in terms of diagnoses, I was a bit confused to see on the intimate partner violence master, these codes like child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, child forced labor, and I wasn't sure, is that child abuse or is that intimate partner violence? Because unless there's some kind of it just felt funny on this intimate partner violence master. I understand that sometimes the intimate partner is someone who's underage, but these felt almost like child abuse codes as opposed to intimate partner violence codes.
Well, the problem is, so it's either adult abuse or it's child abuse, right? So there's ICD gives us two options, right?
Yeah, but are those always, like, I can abuse an elder and it's elder abuse. It's not intimate partner violence, and I can abuse a child who might be my own child, and it's not intimate partner violence. I'm a little, I understand that sometimes it's another adult that's your intimate partner, and occasionally it's someone who's not yet an adult, but there's a funny boundary here in confusing these codes with general child abuse codes, who are not always intimate partners. So it's a little tough for me, but.
Oh yeah, and I think the thing is, I think it's right. I mean, again, right now we're kind of locked into the not so, we're locked into ICD a little bit, but I think it's actually important to consider there might be a need to advocate to better represent that subtlety that you're speaking to.
Sarah, this is Linda. Can I just say something?
Yes.
The one thing to remember in ICD between these abuse codes, the adult and child, and the perpetrator codes, that they're meant to be tied together. Because even with the intimate partner violence, we're using the adult abuse code, but we're using one of these perpetrator codes that makes it more specific to intimate partner violence. So when we use one of the child codes, not only with the age of the patient, but the perpetrator, whether it was the male partner or female partner in that situation, would be the way to lead into the fact that this is intimate partner violence for adolescents.
That's Linda, thank you. Wise. Yeah. And then Daniel shares raising, it's true. In my health record, I literally I'm not allowed to apply an adult code to anybody less than 18, right? I get a hard stop. I'm not able, right? So I don't think it takes away from what we're trying to accomplish, because regardless of the age of the person, if these circumstances present, regardless of whether you're married or not, right? I feel like we need to make sure to not exclude people under the age of 18 from our methodology, especially considering, again, as Lisa was saying, the high rates of sexual and physical and emotional violence between people under 18.
But I think it's really, as we've already covered, very important that we're able to document when the relationship is between a child and an adult.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And so again, Holly, I really would love to try to present. Again, we didn't do this because we were trying to focus, perhaps incorrectly, we've been talking about this a lot with elder abuse. But we'll bring back this kind of secondary panel we're talking about that pulls perpetrator, age of the perpetrator, type, age of the individual, et cetera, and creates kind of this cluster of information you can imagine being applied, and even like an API based on your state to tell you when you have to report. Does that sound good? I'm hoping, Holly, that sounds, I hope.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I'm just not sure we've got enough coding to appropriately cover that. Certainly not, we don't in what's displayed on this slide.
Correct. So you can imagine there being a secondary set of questions that ask age of the perpetrator, right, and pull age of the victim, of the person uh, who experienced violence, the victim, right?
Yeah, and I think this is going to require a lot of training for clinicians because we are talking about intimate partner violence. We're not talking about sexual abuse and molestation or child abuse. So it's going to be pretty complex.
But isn't this already happening? I mean, aren't we already using? We already are assessing in clinical practice adolescent patients who are experiencing sexual, emotional, and physical violence with their partners, their sexual partners. I mean, the identification of this in clinical settings is not new.
Right.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is coding it. So making sure a clinician codes correctly that this is an intimate partner, although it's an adult and a child, it's an intimate partner relationship, not a child sexual abuse relationship. That there's the intimate partner has participated in the relationship as a willing participant, which is, I think
so this is where what Linda was raising, I think, because of the perpetrator codes, you can imagine that. And maybe I think maybe we can talk. I think I'm really looking forward to bringing this back next meeting because of how we're thinking through very similar things with elder abuse.
I think that would be very helpful. Frankly, I'd like to see it laid out.
Okay. But again, the diagnoses, like so diagnosing somebody under the age of 18 with experience of sexual violence by a partner already is occurring, right? So that part isn't novel, correct?
I'm sorry, I was reading the chat. Can you repeat the question?
No, it's okay. I just want to specify that based on current ICD-10-CM, what we're representing here is all we can do right now, right? So gravity's trying to help advance it, but what you see right here is what would happen if you had a person under the age of 18 who was being sexually, physically, emotionally abused by their husband, wife, or male or female partner.
Well, I'm suggesting that we have additional codes for male partner, adult, and male partner child, female partner adult, female partner child.
Okay, so that sounds great. So if you again could submit those via email, that'd be fantastic. Just so we can put it into the cogitation, you know, and then the SMEs can digest it and everything. And I can help you do that, Holly. I'll write you afterwards.
Sure. If you can shoot me an email, I'll be happy to respond.
Okay, that sounds great. All right. Okay. Next slide, please. Any other questions here? Again, this is IPV, and then I think I'm going to pause on elder abuse and let Mark. Okay, actually, before I pause, I am going to pause on elder abuse because we're bringing back elder abuse full force in the next meeting in 2 weeks. How are we feeling? Any further questions regarding IPV that we just covered? Anything Lisa can help with before she drops off the call? I hear I'm going to elevate again Holly's desire to specify the age of the individual in the perpetrator codes in ICD. And again, I'm sorry I didn't even catch on because that's, you know, it's kind of a big ask, but I will see what we can do. We do have a good relationship with the CDC, so that's a good thing to try to use towards this end. Again, we'll try to bring that to the subject matter experts, but anything else to talk about? We've covered social isolation and IPV. The masters are up there. We have a couple things coming in comments. The vote's in 2 weeks. Okay, so then I'm going to if we can breeze through elder abuse and give the mic to our policy and tech team. Oh, actually, can I just highlight one thing? This is not that important. I mean, what is actually very important, it doesn't need to be discussed, it needs to be reviewed. There are updated definitions on for elder abuse that you will be able to find ahead of our meeting in 2 weeks. And these definitions are based off of CDC consensus with this incredible all-national gathering, uniform definitions and unified data elements for elder abuse, and that's going to be the basis of our definition codes. All right. Okay, onward. Next slide, please. Yeah?
Sarah, that definition should say trust and safety, an expectation of trust and safety. I think you just proclaimed that this is written in stone somewhere, but if it isn't involving an expectation of trust and safety, it seems to me.
I think trust includes trust as defined. The paper, I believe the CDC uniform definitions paper is on the Confluence, but I will send it to you personally, Lucy, so that you can see it and then we can have a conversation, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Holly. Okay, onward. Policy update. Go, Mark.
Okay, this is time for a heart stretch, a soul stretch. Next slide. So you all have seen this before. This was on April 15th, the Health IT Advisory Committee unanimously approved a recommendation to add the Gravity Project's Social Determinant of Health data class to the US CDI version 2. And what you see on the slide is the letter lifting up social determinants of health front and center in the intro, saying that these are among the high-level recommendations, and we're waiting to hear the word. I'm repeating this to tee up for the next slide, please. So at yesterday's Health IT Advisory Committee meeting, the Gravity Project was highlighted many times. 2 different task forces were presenting, and so this is to let you know what they said. So the first is from the US CDI task force, US core data for interoperability, and that's the set of data that will be exchanged nationwide for interoperability. They want to hear from the Gravity Project about including more about social determinants of health in version 3 for next year. So not just what we've done so far, version 2, but there is further interest in moving towards the future. So we will be presenting to them in either July or August about that. The second is the Interoperability Standards Priorities Task Force, which was making recommendations on health equity, again, noting how important it is, how important the Gravity Project's work is for health equity, and lifting up that it was important to ensure in some of the other ONC efforts that they follow the Gravity Project's priorities. So all of this is to say that the village on this phone has been doing a fabulous job. It's making real change. It's been in process. We're looking forward to what the ONC decides in July. But what we're now seeing from yesterday's meeting is that it's also tracking into the future, into the next year. So keep up the good work. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sarah.
Woohoo! Thank you, Mark. Thank you, community. It's really the momentum and consensus behind our work is very powerful, and I'm very grateful for everybody leaning in. All right, I believe we have a quick technical update. Is our fearless Bob Didderly on the call? Was he? I believe he was on the call. Bob, are you here? He may have dropped off. So
I just see him on, Sarah. I see him on and on mute. So whether he, I can send him a quick text if you want to go ahead.
Monique, do you feel comfortable? I hate to put you on the spot. So if he's having audio issues, since you're such an integral part of the team.
Yeah, no, since I don't know what he's got here, I don't. Let me just give him a quick text.
All right. Horrible, horrible, Sarah, putting Monique on the spot. Monique from the American Medical Association, who's so critical for our technology work.
Oh, I'm back on. Sorry.
Yay! Welcome, Bob.
Yep. Had to take a little side trip here. Okay. We're going to do a couple things here. Much of really a verbal update. Let's go to the next slide. This is where we are in the process. We are on track to submit the implementation guide for publication by the end of June. We're doing some last updates into the guide. We're updating the description sections over the weekend. We have a current version of the guide in the current build. It has the technical artifacts updated to what are pretty much final. We're doing a little bit of cleanup here on various areas that are required to be cleaned up before publication. Next slide, please. This is the CMS Connectathon. We mentioned it last time. CMS is holding their own virtual Connectathon, July 20th through the 22nd. We will be participating one of the days, either the 21st or 22nd, and I believe it's the 21st, but we'll double check and make sure you know, will be the social determinants of health track. There is no fee to participate. You do have to sign up by July 1, by the end of the day on July 1 through HL7. The link is here. And if you're going to participate and play a role, and there's a list of roles, the same list as we had for the May Connectathon, you should also sign up on the Gravity Confluence site. Next slide, please. And we will have our reference implementation there and available for everyone. We're continuing to update it. We are trying to get applications built to show how a CBO might handle things through a portal application, and a Smart on Fire application for an individual on their, a smart application for people on their smartphone that can go and retrieve and respond to referrals and other information that they can get from more than one individual organization. So we're going to have the ability to connect to multiple providers, multiple payers, multiple coordination platforms, and CBOs. Questions?
Bob, this is Courtney Baldridge from N4A. I'd love to have an offline conversation to better understand the implications of all of that.
Sure. Happy to do it.
Terrific. Thank you.
Send me an email and we'll find the time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bob, this is Carrie Nicholas. I was just curious, there have been some discussions in our work group about consent as a way to manage data sovereignty for tribal entities. Is that something that, is there any sort of use case that might be even close to applicable for that, or is that something novel?
No, we are using consent in one particular use case, and we're doing it intentionally. I think we got somebody that's getting some feedback. You may need to go on mute.
Can we mute if you're not speaking? Please?
Sorry? We've got somebody that's getting feedback. We are using it in a single use case, and that is where information, a referral, is being shared with a business associate of a covered entity, and we're communicating a consent resource to tell that business associate that the individual has granted consent to share it with a non-covered entity. We're doing it just to test the process. We're participating in the work that is being done at HL7 and is being done at ONC. And as we wind up with more definition around how we're going to implement consent broadly in the community, we'll be adding that to our implementation guide. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. So maybe I will talk to you offline and see if you can chat with our group about that. I wanted to find out if that was going to be appropriate.
Happy to do it.
CMS.
Absolutely. We'd love to get your input, and we'd love to go and have you participate.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? All right.
So, yes. Hi. Yeah. So, Carrie, I just want to highlight as well that I don't know if you saw that Abigail Echohawk was part of the that SDOH data integrity, data sovereignty initiative headed by, I can send you the link. So she's such a data sovereignty queen. It might be good to kind of bounce that off of some of her writings and see if there's any further thoughts there. Have you looked at her? Have you looked at her? Oh, the echo's so bad.
Sorry. Yeah, that is. I have not talked to her. She's with the Seattle Indian Health Board.
I'm trying to remember where she is right
Urban
now. You and I can communicate on by email on that.
Yeah,
the echo is so bad, it's hard right now.
I think they are. I think they are on our work group, but she is not personally. But yeah, I would like to talk to you about that. That would be great.
All right, I will send you a link to the press release regarding it. Okay, so I believe we're finished. Again, I'm sorry that echo was so significant. It was a little bit hard to track. Any further questions on tech before we move on to homework and call the meeting? All right, next slide, please. Next slide. Again, everything that we really have to do is just about getting ready for social isolation and IPV vote in the next 2 weeks. So Monique has a comment she's submitting. I'm going to try to elicit some information from Dr. Miller regarding ages of diagnoses. The masters have been up on the Confluence for your review, so you can look at them ahead of the vote. Again, if you have any formal comments, anything you want changed, removed, added, you need to submit it via an email so that we can integrate it. And we're asking that you submit those comments by email in the next week or so that we can make sure we get a master back out in front of anybody that needs in front of the community ahead of time prior to the vote. We really do want to make sure that we have a tidy master for your review as long as possible. And then as we look forward into the next 2 weeks, so when we come back, we'll be voting again on social isolation and intimate partner violence, and then really focusing on elder abuse to take us out. I did hear a desire to try to present on those, what do I do next, how to report as a mandatory reporter data elements, and really that's what Holly Miller, Dr. Miller was calling to light. That's very, very much a consideration of our elder abuse work because adult protective services and mandatory reporting in this space is almost like a universal requirement. So we'll try to bring some of those approaches back that we're considering there. And again, the approach we're taking in that space for elder abuse is not augmenting the ICD-10-CM, as Dr. Miller was highlighting as a possibility, but really creating a supplemental set of information that could be transmitted, right? So if we, age of the victim, age of the perpetrator, the type of perpetrator, and then you can imagine that information being able to communicate to other community partners that are critical. Any other questions on this call? Thanks for your patience with me. Sleep deprived there, the human transporter. Thank you all. Again, thanks Mark for the highlights. Thanks Bob for your updates, and thank you all for your patience and for your engagement in this project. It was a great call. And again, there's more to come on some of these elements. We're very grateful for your participation. Have a lovely Thursday.
Sarah, real quick, this is Tom Page. I just want to note that the nomenclature that Confluence is used in Confluence to name documents and all, with the plus signs, those URLs get cut off after the first plus sign, so they never work. If it's possible to maybe consider changing the nomenclature moving forward, it would make it easier to copy and use these from the chat.
Oh, so what I get is I get an initial alert, and then I can click through to all of them. Do other people have?
Oh, okay.
So like, for instance, if I just clicked officially join the Gravity Project, or if I click, I get an initial, well, I get a link from the WebEx, and then I'm able to go to them, all of them. So Tom, we are really—
No, that isn't how it works. I have to copy and paste all of those links all the time.
Okay, so something, okay, we are committed to making it better. I am the least capable person to fix this, but I promise you, I have other areas of assistance, but the team that is most able to assist is on this call, and we will make sure that we fix them.
Yeah, I think if the plus signs are changed to a dash, it'll take care of it.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great meeting today.
So change from a plus to a minus sign, and we'll be good.
Okay.
I'm waiting to see that. Thank you, Tom.
Oh my Lord. Okay, thanks, Fred. Bye.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
good week, everybody.
Bye.